Every corner of this house is filled with silence. No matter how much I turn on the TV or the radio, the silence still finds a place. In the empty rooms upstairs, in the long hallways, between the books no one opens. This used to be a house filled with sounds, Verna's laughter, phone conversations, the noise of dishes in the kitchen. Now, the echo of my footsteps is the only thing left here. I wasn't always like this. A lonely old man of 78 counting the minutes between medication appointments. I was once Leighton Halifax, owner of the largest printing company in Cloverdale, a man whose name meant something. Tonight is especially cold. October in Cloverdale has always been dank, but over the years I've come to feel that cold more intensely. Verna died 2 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, diagnosed too late. We had been together for 53 years. Now all that's left of her are the pictures on the walls and things I don't dare touch. The printing business was my salvation after the Vietnam War. I came back a different man, with nightmares and shrapnel in my left hip. My Uncle Fergus owned a small print shop and offered me a job. It was exactly what I needed. Precision, order, tangible results. When my uncle died, he left the business to me. It was the 90s and digital printing was just gaining momentum. I took a risk, sold my house, took out a loan and bought the first digital printing machine in town. Then I bought the second and a third. 10 years later, Halifax Printing was the largest print shop in the county. We printed everything from wedding invitations to billboards to corporate reports. Verna always supported me. She worked as an accountant for our company, keeping our finances under control. Together, we built something to be proud of. When I sold the business to a national chain 5 years ago, I had 7 zeros in my account. But money is a strange thing. It shows people's true colors. "Dad, you have to move to a smaller house," Ruth told me last month. "This house is too big for you alone. You need something more manageable." I knew what she was really talking about. Money. Always about money. Ruth is our only daughter. Verna suffered 3 miscarriages before Ruth was born. Maybe that's why we spoiled her too much. Private school, riding lessons, summer camps in Europe. Verna and I grew up poor and wanted our daughter to have everything we didn't. I still remember Ruth as a 6-year-old girl standing in the toy store, stomping her foot and shouting, "But I want it now!" And we relented. We always did. In college, she changed 3 majors before settling on communications. Then there was a series of jobs, each of which she quit because her bosses didn't appreciate her potential. At 35, she was still searching for herself when she met Prescott Weatherby. The first time I met him, he gave me the impression of a man who had spent too long studying how to make a good first impression. Impeccable suit, perfectly cut hair, a smile that showed exactly the right number of teeth. He worked as an insurance appraiser, and in his gaze I saw the same calculation with which he must have inspected damaged property. "I've heard so much about you, sir," he said, shaking my hand that first evening. "Ruth told me how you built your empire from scratch. That's admirable." Verna nudged me with her elbow, silently demanding to be polite. "It was just hard work and a little luck," I replied. "Oh, don't be modest, Dad," Ruth interjected. "Prescott, too, understands the value of making the right investments." I noticed his gaze shift for a moment to the wall clock, the Howard Miller antique clock I'd bought at auction for $25,000. They were married 6 months later. Verna was thrilled. She'd always wanted to see Ruth settled, with a family. I paid for the wedding, $85,000 for 1 day of showmanship. Shortly afterward, they asked us to help with the down payment on the house. "It's an investment, Dad," Ruth explained. "Real estate is only going up in value in this neighborhood. I gave them $200,000. Verna said it was our duty as parents to help. I didn't mind, after all. Who was I saving for if not my family? But the request didn't stop. When their first child, Hazel, was born, a nanny was needed. Then private daycare. Then their second child, Thatcher, and the same expenses again. You don't want your grandchildren to grow up without the privileges you can provide for them, do you? Ruth asked when I finally expressed my doubts. Verna had always been on her side. It's our blood, Leighton. Who else have we worked for? The year before Verna died, she and I went to visit the kids for Christmas. The house was immaculate, a huge tree, professionally decorated, presents wrapped by a special service. Hazel, who was 7 at the time, got her first iPhone. Thatcher, 5 years old, got an electric mini car that he could drive around the yard. When I asked my grandchildren what they would like to get from their grandparents, they shrugged. They already had everything. After dinner, I overheard Ruth and Prescott talking in the kitchen. "Daddy looks tired," Ruth said, thinking I couldn't hear. "He's not getting any younger," Prescott replied. "Have you talked to him about the will?" "Not yet, but I'll have to." Mother was always more prudent about it. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay beside Verna, listening to her heavy breathing, and thought about what our daughter had become. When did she stop being the little girl I carried on my shoulders and become a woman counting the days until I died? Verna died in the spring. Her condition deteriorated so quickly that we barely had time to prepare. She was often under the influence of morphine in her last days, but in moments of clarity she held my hand tightly. "Take care of Ruth," she said one day. "She's strong, but she needs support." I nodded, not wanting to argue with my dying wife. But the truth was that Ruth didn't need me, just my money. At the funeral, Ruth sobbed the loudest. Prescott stood beside her, supporting her by the shoulders, occasionally leaning over to whisper something in her ear. The grandchildren were quiet and confused. They rarely saw their grandmother except on holidays and didn't quite know what was going on. After the funeral, I expected them to suggest that I stay with them for a few days. Instead, Ruth asked if I wanted them to help me sort through Mom's things. "It's too soon," I replied. "But Dad, it will be easier for you if you don't see her things every day," she insisted. I refused, and they left that same evening. For the next few months, I lived like a fog, making breakfast for 2 in the morning. I'd buy her favorite kind of tea. Sometimes I'd start talking to her before I realized she was gone. Ruth called once a week. The conversations were short and perfunctory. She never asked how I was really coping. Instead, she talked about the kids, the house, her problems. One day she mentioned that she was thinking about going back to college for a master's degree. "It's expensive, but it's an investment in the future," she said. I knew what she was getting at. Prescott started stopping by more often, usually at lunchtime, to check on me. He looked around the house with ill-concealed interest, commenting on how difficult it must be for me to manage such a large space. One day I noticed him using his phone to take a picture of the painting in my study, the Edward Hopper original that Verna and I had bought for our 20th wedding anniversary. "Just admiring it," he explained when I asked what he was doing. "Such expressive work." The next day he sent me a link to an auction site where a similar Hopper piece had sold for 6 zeros. "Just thought you might be interested to know how much your collection is worth now," he wrote. When I didn't reply, he called. "Leighton, I just wanted to tell you that if you ever need to have your art or antiques appraised, I have contacts in that area." "Thank you, but I don't plan on selling anything," I replied. There was a pause. Of course. Just in case you want to, simplify your life." Ruth started coming over with the kids about once a month. She said it was so the kids could spend time with Grandpa, but most of the visit was spent going through Verna's things. "Mom would want me to take her pearls," she said one day, holding up the necklace I'd given Verna for our 30th anniversary. "Your mom loved that necklace," I replied. "She wore it every Christmas, and that's why it should stay in the family," Ruth insisted. Hazel's elementary school graduation was coming up. It would be nice if she had something from her grandmother. I looked at Hazel, who was sitting in the corner of the living room, staring at her phone, completely ignoring everything around her. "I'll think about it," I said. The next day, the pearls disappeared from Verna's jewelry box. Ruth denied taking it, suggesting that I had probably put it somewhere else and forgotten about it. She had the same tone in her voice that she had used to talk to me after Verna's death, as someone who was no longer quite herself. Gradually, I began to notice small valuables disappearing from the house after each of their visits. Verna's silver spoons, antique books from my collection, a porcelain figurine we brought back from a trip to Japan. When I asked Ruth directly about it, she cried, "How can you accuse me of stealing? I'm your daughter. I'm just trying to preserve Mom's things for future generations." Prescott took me aside then. "Leighton, listen," he said in a quiet, judicious tone. "Ruth is taking the loss of her mother very hard. These things help her feel connected to her. Isn't that what Verna would have wanted?" I didn't answer. Verna would want our daughter to treat me with respect, not as an obstacle between her and the inheritance. After this incident, their visits became less frequent. Instead, there was more talk that I should consider a nursing home or an aide to live with me. "We're worried about you, Dad," Ruth said on the phone. "What if you fall? What if you forget to take your medicine?" I knew where this was going. Selling the house, selling things, controlling my finances. I'd seen it happen to my friends. As soon as the kids got power of attorney, parental assets started to melt away. Last month, Prescott arrived with paperwork from a lawyer, a power of attorney that gave Ruth the authority to manage my affairs in the event of incapacity. "It's just a precaution," he explained. "Ruth worries that you sometimes forget important things. I didn't sign the papers." Instead, the next day I went to my attorney, Alvin Hammond, who has handled my affairs for the past 30 years. "They're trying to get control of your assets," Alvin said, looking over the papers Prescott had brought. "It's a standard tactic. The next step will be a medical examination to prove your incapacity." I updated my will and executed a medical power of attorney in Alvin's name, not Ruth's. I also had a full medical examination which confirmed that, despite my arthritis and high blood pressure, there was nothing wrong with my mental faculties. When Ruth found out, she was furious. "You don't trust me." "Your own daughter," she yelled over the phone, "after everything Prescott and I have done for you." "What exactly have you done for me, Ruth?" I asked calmly. She found no answer. Now, sitting in my office, looking at the empty shelf where the collector's books used to stand, I realized that I lost my daughter much sooner than I lost my wife. Perhaps I never really knew her. Or worse, knew her, but refused to admit the truth. The phone rings, interrupting my thoughts. It's Ruth. I know what she's going to say before I even answer. "Dad, we need to have a serious talk." Her voice sounds tense. "It's about your will and, something important that's happened. We'll be there tomorrow." I hang up the phone and look at the picture of Verna on the table. "You were right, dear, I think. She does need support, but not the kind you thought." Ruth arrived alone. This was unusual. Usually Prescott accompanied her, especially when money was involved. I heard her car pull up, the new Lexus they'd bought last year, and stood at the window, watching as she parked. She sat behind the wheel for a long time, staring at her phone, apparently gathering her thoughts or getting final instructions from her husband. Finally, she got out, fixed her hair, and headed toward the house. I opened the door before she rang the bell. "Hello, Ruth," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Dad?" She smiled, strained, and kissed me on the cheek. She smelled of expensive perfume and anxiety. She walked into the living room, looking around as if assessing the changes since her last visit. She glanced at the empty space where a Qing Dynasty porcelain vase had stood, one of Verna's most prized possessions that had disappeared after Ruth's previous visit. "Tea? Coffee?" I offered. "No, thank you." She sat down on the couch, her hands folded in her lap. "I don't have much time. Thatcher's at soccer practice today, and Hazel needs to be picked up from her piano lessons at 4. I sat down across from her, waiting for her to get to the point. Didn't have to wait long. Dad, I know our relationship has been a little strained, she began, choosing her words carefully. And I want you to know that Prescott and I are very worried about you, living alone in such a big house at your age. I'm quite comfortable, I interrupted her. And I'm not alone. Mrs. Patterson comes 3 times a week to help with the cleaning and cooking. Ruth pressed her lips together. It's not like having a family around. Maybe, I agreed. But you said yesterday you wanted to talk about something serious. I doubt you came here to discuss my living arrangements. She took a deep breath, like she was about to dive into cold water. The thing is, Dad, we've had a difficult situation. A medical situation. I'm tense. Despite all our differences, the thought that something serious could have happened to my grandchildren or even Ruth made me anxious. Is there something wrong with the children? I asked. No, not the children. She looked away. It's Prescott. I waited for her to continue, feeling the suspicion building inside me. He's been diagnosed with a rare form of lymphoma, she said finally. It was diagnosed 2 weeks ago. We've consulted with the best specialists and there is an experimental treatment, but it's not covered by insurance. I stared at her, trying to see the truth in her eyes. Over the years, I'd witnessed many of her stories, each one ending with a plea for money. A college fund for Hazel that needed to be replenished right now because of some lucrative investment window. Urgent roof repairs after a hurricane that it later turned out didn't even affect their neighborhood. Money for a consultation with a top specialist for Thatcher who supposedly had learning problems. Money that ended up going to a family vacation in the Bahamas. I'm sorry to hear that, I said cautiously. What did the doctors say about the prognosis? She blinked, as if the question had taken her by surprise. Well, they say it's an aggressive form, but with the right treatment, the chances are good. And what kind of treatment do they recommend? It's a new type of immunotherapy, she replied, perking up a bit. It was developed in Switzerland and has shown amazing results in clinical trials. But since it hasn't been approved by the FDA yet, insurance refuses to cover the cost. I nodded, pretending to listen attentively. And how much does this treatment cost? She swallowed. $375,000. The exact amount, not about or approximately. I remembered that last year when I updated my will, my attorney had mentioned that my liquid assets totaled just over $2 million. Ruth was nearby. I had invited her to attend the conversation as a gesture of goodwill. $375,000 is about 1/5 of $1.5 million. A comfortable sum, not too small to be worth the effort and not so large as to raise too many questions. It's a large sum, I remarked. I know, Daddy. She leaned forward, her eyes filling with tears. Believe me, we wouldn't be asking if it wasn't a matter of life and death. We've already mortgaged the house to pay for the initial counseling and tests. But a full course of treatment, we just can't afford it on our own. I stood up and walked over to the fireplace where there was a picture of Verna, one of the few that Ruth hadn't borrowed yet. It showed Verna standing by the lake, laughing, her hair fluttering in the wind. That was a year before she was diagnosed. Your mother really believed in you, I said quietly, even when all the facts said otherwise. What? Ruth looked confused. Dad, we're talking about Prescott's health. I turned to her. Prescott doesn't have lymphoma, Ruth. Her face froze. What are you talking about? I'm saying you're lying. Again. How can you? She started to get indignant, but I raised my hand to stop her. 2 months ago, I ran into Prescott by chance in town. He was with a client, didn't see me. I saw him playing squash at the Oak Ridge Club. A man with aggressive lymphoma couldn't possibly be that active in sports. It was a bluff. I never saw Prescott play squash. But I knew my daughter, knew when she was lying. Ruth opened her mouth, then closed it. Her face reddened. Are you following us? She finally squeezed out. No, I shook my head. But it's hard to hide things in this town, especially when your husband brags about his athletic accomplishments at LinkedIn. Yesterday, by the way, he posted a photo from a tennis tournament. Now it was true. I had actually seen the posting when I checked social media, a habit I had acquired over the past year to keep up with what was going on in my family's life, since they rarely told me anything directly. Ruth changed tactics. Okay, maybe I exaggerated a bit, but Prescott did have some health problems, knots in his neck that needed to be checked out, and the doctors did recommend additional tests, just to be on the safe side. And those tests cost $375,000? I asked skeptically. She sighed, clearly realizing that this line of defense wasn't working. Look, Dad, her tone hardened. This isn't just about Prescott's health. We're really struggling financially right now. Mortgage interest has gone up, Hazel's school has raised tuition, and Prescott's company is downsizing. And that's why you decided to make up a story about a terminal illness? I shook my head. Ruth, you're 47 years old. When are you going to grow up? I am an adult, she jumped to her feet. And I'm trying to take care of my family. What's wrong with that? Nothing if you did it honestly, I replied. If you had just come and said you were having financial difficulties and asked for help, we could have discussed it like adults. Instead, you're making up this ridiculous story about an experimental treatment in Switzerland. It's not ridiculous, she insisted, but her voice trembled. Such treatments do exist. They might. But Prescott doesn't need them. I sat back in my chair. Ruth, I'm tired of these games. Every time you come to me, it ends with you asking for money. And every time, the story gets more dramatic. She stood in the middle of the room, her hands clenched into fists. It's not fair, Dad. We've come to you for help. What, maybe 4 or 5 times over the years? 17, I corrected. 17 emergencies in the last 10 years, not counting the regular gifts for birthdays, holidays, and just because. She looked genuinely surprised that I was keeping score. Did you... writing it down? I keep track of my finances, yes. And over the last 10 years, I've given you and Prescott a total of $1,200,000. She blinked, clearly not expecting that exact figure. But it was an investment in our future, your grandchildren's future. No, Ruth, it was money you spent on luxuries you couldn't afford, designer clothes, exotic vacations, country club memberships, anything that helped you maintain the illusion of wealth. That's not true, she raised her voice. We work hard. Prescott spends 12 hours a day in the office. And yet, somehow, you're always on the verge of financial ruin, I remarked. Interesting, isn't it? She was breathing heavily, her face flushed with anger. You know what, Dad? You've gotten so cynical since Mom died. She would never have refused to help us. That was a low blow and she knew it. Verna really had always been softer, more accommodating when it came to Ruth. But even she had begun to express doubts in recent years, especially after that incident with Hazel's educational trip money, which, it later turned out, had gone to repair the pool. Your mother believed in family, I said calmly. But she also believed in honesty and responsibility, qualities that never seemed to be your strengths. How dare you? Ruth stepped closer, her voice shaking with rage. After all we've done for you. And what exactly have you done for me, Ruth? I asked, deliberately repeating the question I had asked her during our last telephone conversation. Remind me, when was the last time you didn't come to me for money? When you asked how I was feeling without immediately adding a comment about how hard it must be for me to live alone in this big house. She stepped back, clearly not expecting such a direct challenge. We invited you to Thanksgiving last year and canceled the invitation the day before the holiday because you unexpectedly had to leave for the mountains with Prescott's friends. It was an important business meeting, she insisted. At a ski resort on a holiday weekend? I shook my head. Ruth, let's just call things what they are. I'm not a father and grandfather to you. I'm an ATM machine. I'm a source of funds. And when I refuse to dispense money, I become a nuisance. She stood silent, her lower lip trembling. For a moment I saw in her the little girl who cried when she didn't get what she wanted for Christmas. But then her face hardened. So you refuse to help us? Even knowing we're in desperate straits? I refuse to give you $375,000 for non-existent treatment. Yes, I replied. But if you came to me honestly, told me your financial problems and offered a real plan to solve them, I'd listen. A plan, she snorted. You're 78 years old, Dad. You have millions in accounts you don't even spend. What's the point of that money if you don't help your family? It's not about money, Ruth. It's about respect. It's about honesty. You come to me with a blatant lie, expecting me to just write a check, no questions asked. Okay, I lied about the lymphoma. She threw up her hands. Are you satisfied? I admitted it. But we really need the money, Dad. Without it, we could lose the house. I took a deep breath. Why would you lose the house? You refinanced it 3 years ago. I gave you the money to pay off the mortgage in full. She looked away. We, took out a second loan. Why? Investments, she mumbled. What kind of investment? She was silent for a moment, clearly not wanting to answer. Prescott had heard about an opportunity to invest in a startup, a company that's developing some revolutionary technology for the oil industry. I closed my eyes. Of course you did. Another get-rich-quick scheme. How much did you invest? $400,000, she whispered. And let me guess, the money disappeared? She nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. The founder of the company ran off with the investors' money. The FBI is looking for him now, but no one knows if we'll get any of it back. I felt a mixture of disappointment, anger, and, oddly, pity. Ruth had never been good at making financial decisions. Verna always said it was because we never taught her the value of money. We gave her whatever she wanted without asking for anything in return. Why didn't you come to me with the truth right away? I asked. Because I knew you would judge us, she snapped through her tears. You'd lecture us on how irresponsible and wasteful we are, how we never learn from our mistakes. Isn't that the truth? She wiped the tears away with the back of her hand, and I could see the anger displacing the vulnerability again. You've always been like this. Always thought you knew better. You and Mom both. Never let me make my own decisions. We did let you make your own decisions, Ruth. It's just that then we always paid the consequences of those decisions. You know what? She grabbed her bag. Forget I asked. We can handle ourselves. We always have. No, we haven't, I countered. You always came to me or your mother when things got bad enough. Well, no more. She headed for the door. Enjoy your millions, Dad. I hope they keep you warm at night. Ruth, I stood up. Wait. She stopped, but she didn't turn around. What? I can help you with a financial advisor. Help you work out a repayment plan. Maybe even give you a small amount of money to keep you afloat while you deal with this situation. She turned around, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. Really? But, I continued, I need complete financial transparency. No secrets, no lies, and you and Prescott will have to agree to a budget and a cost-cutting plan. The hope in her eyes turned to indignation. You want to control us? Tell us how to spend our money? No, Ruth. I want to teach you how not to find yourself in this situation every few years. She shook her head. I'm not a child, Daddy. I don't need lessons from you. Then there's nothing I can do to help you. She stood in the doorway, her shoulders slumped. So you're just going to let us lose the house? Leave your grandchildren without a roof over their heads? You could sell the other car, I suggested. Give up your country club membership. Move the kids to public school. There are plenty of ways to cut costs without becoming homeless. You don't understand, she hissed. We can't just change the way we live. We have a certain status, certain expectations in our social circle. Then you have to choose between status and financial stability, I shrugged. It's a choice adults make every day. She looked at me with a long stare, full of resentment and anger. You enjoy it, don't you? Seeing us suffer. Is this some kind of revenge for not spending enough time with you since Mom died? No, Ruth, I shook my head. I'm not enjoying your suffering. I'm just tired of being used. Used? She laughed bitterly. We're your family, the only family you have left. Family isn't just shared blood or legal ties, I replied. It's respect, caring, mutuality. I haven't felt any of that from you or Prescott in years. She looked at me as if seeing me for the first time. What happened to you, Dad? You never used to be so, cold. I'm not cold, Ruth. I just finally stopped pretending everything was okay when it wasn't. I took a step toward her. I love you. You're my daughter. But I'm not going to let you manipulate me or lie to me anymore. Good, she straightened up. That's fine. We'll figure it out on our own. Don't call me. And don't expect to see your grandchildren anytime soon. With those words, she walked out, slamming the door so hard that the old picture frame fell off the wall in the hallway. I heard her start the car, the tires shrieking as she pulled sharply out of the driveway. I picked up the fallen photograph. A crack crossed the glass diagonally, separating our faces, mine, Verna's, and little Ruth, who was about 5 years old at the time. We were at the zoo, all smiles. Ruth was holding a pink cotton candy that was bigger than her head. I remembered that day, how excited she was about the elephants, how long she stood at the monkey enclosure, how she fell asleep on the way back home, exhausted from the experience. Where is that little girl? At what point did she turn into the woman who had just walked out of my house threatening to deprive me of contact with my grandchildren if I didn't give her money? Maybe Verna was right. Maybe it was our fault. We were always too busy being in business, building our empire. Ruth got everything she wanted, but maybe not what she needed: our time, our leadership, our values. Or perhaps some people are just born with a certain character that can't be changed. I remembered how Ruth as a child never wanted to share toys with other children, how she could throw tantrums if she didn't get what she wanted, and how those tantrums would magically stop when she thought no one was looking. I set the cracked photograph on the table. Perhaps there was a poetry to this cracked glass, a broken family, a broken relationship. But deep down, I knew those relationships had been broken long before today. I went to the kitchen and poured myself a whiskey. Not a good idea at my age and with my medication, but today I would make an exception. Standing at the kitchen window, looking out at the garden that Verna loved so much, I pondered what would happen next. Ruth would come back. I was sure of it. When the money pressure became too much, when they realized they might actually lose the house, they would come again. And perhaps next time with a more elaborate story, or worse, a more desperate plan. After talking to Ruth, I didn't expect any of them to show up anytime soon. So the doorbell at 15 o'clock the next day took me by surprise. I was just finishing my usual daily rounds of the house, making sure all the windows were closed and all the appliances were off, a habit I'd acquired after Verna had once left the stove on, which had almost caused a fire. I went to the door and looked out the peephole. Standing on the doorstep was Prescott in his immaculate beige suit. Next to him was his mother, Hilda Weatherby, a woman I'd seen half a dozen times over the years. She usually avoided family gatherings, preferring to spend her time at her country club or at charity events where she could brag about her son's successes. I opened the door, unable to hide my surprise. Prescott, Mrs. Weatherby. To what do I owe this unexpected visit? Prescott smiled his practiced smile. Leighton, I apologize for the suddenness of it. We were in the neighborhood visiting an old friend of my mother's, and we thought, why not drop in on you? We haven't seen much of each other lately. Hilda, dressed in a strict, navy blue suit that seemed too formal for a casual visit, nodded. "Mr. Halifax," her voice was as cold as a January morning, "I hope we're not intruding." "No, we're not." I stepped back, letting them inside, though instinct told me to slam the door. "Come into the living room." They came in, and I noticed Prescott taking a quick look around the hallway as if taking inventory. "It's as spotless as I remembered," he said, pointing to the 18th century antique dresser that Verna and I had bought in London years ago. "I try to keep things in order," I replied, ushering them into the living room. "Have a seat. Can I offer tea or coffee?" "Tea would be lovely," Hilda said, sitting down carefully on the edge of the sofa, as if she were afraid of sinking too deeply into it. Prescott remained standing, examining the bookshelves. "An impressive collection, Leighton. First editions?" "Some." I didn't specify which ones. Prescott had once borrowed a rare first edition of Hemingway that had mysteriously disappeared during a move. "I'll get the tea," I said, heading for the kitchen. "Let me help," Prescott offered suddenly, following me. "Mother prefers her tea very weak. I could trace it." It was a strange thing to say. In all his years, Prescott had never shown any interest in kitchen matters. But I decided not to show my surprise. "Of course," I nodded. In the kitchen, I pulled out Verna's antique tea set, one of the few that Ruth had yet to take away. Prescott watched my movements with a kind of unnatural attention. "You know, Leighton, Ruth came back very upset last night," he began as I put the kettle on. "I can imagine." I took the tea bags out of the cupboard. "It's not nice to have your plans ruined." Prescott tensed slightly, but quickly regained his fake nonchalance. "Plans? I don't know what you mean." "I think you do." I looked him straight in the eye. 375,000, experimental treatment in Switzerland, for your lymphoma. He blinked, but quickly pulled himself together. "Oh, that? Yeah, it was a little exaggerated. But we're really struggling financially, and Ruth just didn't know how to approach this conversation." "So, you decided to lie about being terminally ill?" He waved his hands in a conciliatory gesture. "We all do stupid things when we're desperate. That's what I wanted to talk to you about, by the way." My mother and I discussed the situation and thought that perhaps we could all find a compromise. The kettle boiled, and I set about making tea. "What kind of compromise does Mrs. Weatherby suggest?" I asked, making the tea. "Well, perhaps not the whole amount at once. Perhaps instead we could discuss regular contributions to the family's welfare. A monthly trust fund for the grandchildren, for example." I could barely contain my laughter. They wasted no time moving on to Plan B. "Why is your mother so interested in this?" I asked, putting the cups on the tray. Prescott wrinkled his nose. "Well, you know, she's worried about her only son, and her grandchildren, of course." "Of course," I nodded, though it's strange that she doesn't see them that often. "She's a very busy woman," Prescott answered quickly. "Her charity work takes up a lot of her time." I nodded, deciding not to pursue the subject. "Take the tray into the living room, please. I'll be there in a minute." When he walked out, I took a deep breath, trying to collect my thoughts. Something wasn't right here. Prescott had never come with his mother, and certainly not the day after refusing to give the money. There had to be some other plan here. I picked up the sugar bowl and headed for the living room, but stopped at the door when I heard a quiet conversation. "It's been too long," Hilda was saying. "We've got to get this over with." "I know, Mother," Prescott replied. "But we can't just pick up and—" They were silent when I came in. Hilda smiled strainedly. "What a beautiful set," she remarked. "Victorian?" "Early 20th century," I replied, setting the sugar bowl on the table. "A gift from Verna for our 30th anniversary." "Oh, how nice." She took the cup with apparent indifference to its origin or meaning. "Prescott has been telling me about your situation. It's very unfortunate that there's such a disagreement in the family." I sat back in my chair, feeling like I was being interrogated. Disagreements happen when people want different things, Mrs. Weatherby. Hilda, please. She took a small sip of tea. After all, we're almost family. Almost, I agreed. Although we don't see each other that often for people who are family. She pressed her lips together. I have a very busy schedule. Charity work, social obligations. Of course, I nodded. We all do. There was an awkward pause. Prescott cleared his throat. Leighton, I think we're off on the wrong note. We're not here to ask for money or anything like that. We just wanted to make a connection. An unexpected desire, I said. Especially since yesterday Ruth told me never to call or expect to see the grandchildren again. Hilda cast a sharp glance at her son. Ruth's always been too emotional, she said with slight disapproval. It's not a Weatherby family trait, I assure you. Certainly not, I agreed, watching Prescott tapping his fingers nervously on his knee. You know what? He said suddenly, standing up. I just remembered that I have some great coffee in my car that I bought especially for you, Leighton. That Brazilian brand you mentioned once. Let me get it for you. Before I could answer, he sprinted out of the room. I didn't remember ever discussing coffee varieties with him, but I decided not to comment on it. Your son seems troubled, I remarked, looking at Hilda. She adjusted the pearl necklace around her neck, a gesture I'd often noticed in Ruth when she was nervous. Prescott's always been a sensitive child, she said. Takes on too much, cares about his family, about his children's future. That's a commendable quality, I nodded, though sometimes the best way to take care of the future is to teach children to be self-reliant, not dependent on others. Her eyes narrowed. Are you implying that my son is dependent? No, I smiled. I'm talking about the general principles of parenting. Prescott returned, holding a small tin of coffee. Here it is, he announced with exaggerated enthusiasm. May I use your kitchen to make it? I know how you like a good coffee after tea. I've never had coffee after tea, but I was too intrigued to refuse. Sure, I pointed toward the kitchen. The coffee maker is on the top shelf to the left of the refrigerator. Great! He practically ran out of the room. I looked at Hilda, who now seemed even more tense. Your son is very kind today, I remarked. He's always been well-mannered, she replied, but her eyes were fixed on the door to the kitchen. I heard Prescott rattling dishes, opening and closing cabinets. It was odd that he was so well-versed in a kitchen he'd only been in a couple times. Did Prescott mention that you were having trouble with the house? I asked Hilda, trying to keep the conversation going. She looked surprised. The house? Oh no, my house is perfectly fine. Prescott must have been referring to their house. Something with the roof, I think. I wonder. Yesterday, Ruth was talking about possibly losing the house to a second mortgage, but Hilda didn't seem to know about it. Yes, of course, I nodded. Roofs always need attention. Prescott returned with 3 cups of coffee on a small tray. Here I am. He set the tray on the table. This one is especially for you, Leighton. He pointed to the cup in the center. Mom, this one is for you. He handed her the cup on the right. I took the cup in front of me and held it up to my nose. The coffee smelled strange. There was some bitterness underneath the usual aroma, an unpleasant tinge that I couldn't identify. It looks wonderful, I said without taking a sip. What kind is it exactly? Oh, it's a special blend, Prescott replied, clearly nervous. From the Minas Gerais region. Very rare. I nodded as if that meant something to me. And you grind the beans yourself? Yes, he answered too quickly. I mean, they were pre-ground, but the quality is excellent. Hilda looked at her cup with slight perplexity, but did not drink. Prescott, dear, you know I prefer tea. But this is special coffee, Mom, he insisted. You must try it, for Leighton. Her eyebrows raised slightly, but she nodded. Of course, if you insist. I slowly set my cup on the table. You know what? I need to show you something before we continue our conversation. I stood up and walked over to the bookcase, pretending to look for something. There was a scrapbook with pictures of Ruth and Prescott's wedding in here somewhere. Thought it would be nice to reminisce about those days. Hilda and Prescott turned to the closet, watching my movements. I took the moment to quickly swap my cup with Hilda's. Prescott was too busy watching me to notice it. Oh, I must have moved it somewhere else. I returned to my chair. Maybe I'll find it later. I took Hilda's now cup and pretended I was going to drink. To family? I suggested, raising the cup. To family, Prescott agreed, raising his cup. His hand trembled slightly. Hilda also raised the cup that had been mine before. To family and understanding, she added. I pretended to take a sip, but actually barely touched the coffee with my lips. Hilda took a small sip and fiddled with it. Pretty strong, she remarked. Prescott looked strangely pleased. Yes, it's a special kind. Not everyone likes it the first time. I put the cup on the table. So, you wanted to discuss restoring family ties. For the next 45 minutes, we had one of the strangest conversations of my life. Prescott and Hilda talked about family values, the importance of supporting each other in times of need, legacy, and future generations. All the while, Prescott kept his eyes on my cup, which I barely touched, only occasionally pretending to drink. Hilda took occasional small sips from her cup, wrinkling her nose each time. After about an hour, I noticed that she was paler than usual. "Mrs. Weatherby, are you all right?" I asked. "You don't look very well." She smiled weakly. "It's a little stuffy in here, isn't it?" She put her hand to the collar of her blouse. "Perhaps I could ask for a glass of water?" "Sure." I stood up. "I'll get it right away." When I returned with the water, Hilda looked even worse. Her face was sweating and her hands were visibly shaking. "Mom?" Prescott finally noticed her condition. "Are you all right?" "Yeah." She tried to stand up but suddenly swayed. "I feel, strange." "Maybe you should sit down," I suggested, but it was too late. Hilda fell back onto the couch, her eyes rolled back and her body began to convulse. "Mommy!" Prescott shouted, jumping up. "Mom, what's wrong?" I immediately went to the phone. "I'm calling an ambulance," I said, dialing the number. Prescott was thrashing between his mother and me, his face contorted with panic and bewilderment. "What's going on? What's wrong with her?" "I don't know," I said when the dispatcher answered. "I need an ambulance," I said into the receiver, giving the address. "A woman, about 70 years old, lost consciousness. Convulsions. Yes, there is breathing, but it's irregular." Hanging up, I went back to Hilda. Her spasms have gotten worse and she's foaming at the mouth. "We need to get her on her side," I said, trying to turn her over, "so she doesn't suffocate." Prescott helped me, but his movements were mechanical, like a robot. He looked completely lost. It wasn't supposed to," he mumbled. I looked at him. "What wasn't supposed to happen? What's going on, Prescott?" His eyes widened with horror as he stared at his mother, at me, at the coffee cups. "I don't understand," he whispered. "It was you. It was supposed to be you." At that moment, I realized that my suspicions were confirmed. The coffee was poisoned. It was meant for me, but Hilda drank it instead. "What was in the coffee?" I asked, grabbing him by the lapels of his jacket. "Tell me now. The paramedics need to know what poisoned her." Prescott recoiled, his face contorted with horror and anger. You changed the cups," he accused. "I saw you standing by the cupboard. You knew. What was in the coffee?" I raised my voice. I can't." He retreated to the door. "It was you. You did this. You poisoned my mother." At that moment, the front door swung open and Ruth entered. She froze on the threshold of the living room, her eyes widening with shock at the sight of Hilda lying convulsed on the sofa and the two of us standing over her. What's going on here?" Her voice shook. "Your husband just tried to poison me," I said calmly, "but he poisoned his mother instead." "What?" Ruth looked from me to Prescott. "What are you talking about?" "He's lying," Prescott shouted. "He switched the cups. He knew." "The cups? What cups?" Ruth stepped closer, finally noticing the 3 cups of coffee on the table. "Prescott, what did you do?" "I didn't do anything. I didn't do anything." He backed up against the wall. "It was him. He wanted to get rid of us all so we wouldn't get his money." I heard ambulance sirens approaching the house. "The ambulance is here," I said, heading for the door. "Ruth, keep an eye on Hilda. Keep her on her side." Ruth, still in shock, nodded mechanically and walked over to the couch. Her face was white as chalk. "Prescott," she whispered, looking at her husband, "tell me you haven't." But Prescott had already run out of the room, heading for the back door. I heard him run out into the garden, but I did not pursue him. It was more important to save Hilda now. I opened the door to the paramedics, who quickly entered with a stretcher and equipment. "Female, 70 years old, possible poisoning," I said as I led them into the living room. "The seizure started about 10 minutes ago." One of the paramedics knelt down next to Hilda, checking her pulse and pupils. "Do you have any idea what she might have been poisoned with?" he asked. I pointed to the cups. "Coffee. Her son made it. I suspect it's some kind of poison." The second paramedic took the cup Hilda was drinking from and sniffed it. "We'll take this with us for analysis," he said, carefully placing the cup in a plastic bag. Ruth stood against the wall, her hands trembling. "I don't understand," she repeated. "I don't understand what's happening." The paramedics moved Hilda onto a stretcher, hooking up an oxygen mask and starting an IV. "We're taking her to St. Mary's Hospital," one of them said. "Are you related?" "I'm her son," came a voice from the doorway. Prescott came back, his face deathly pale. "I'm coming with you." The paramedic nodded. Only one person could ride in an ambulance. Prescott turned to Ruth. "I'll meet you there." Ruth nodded, still in a state of shock. When the paramedics carried Hilda out, Prescott followed them without looking at me. But I heard his quiet words as he passed. "This isn't over, old man." I stayed in the living room with Ruth, looking at the 3rd cup of coffee, the one Prescott was drinking from. It was almost full. He had hardly touched his coffee. "Daddy," Ruth's voice trembled. "Tell me the truth. What happened here?" I looked at my daughter, trying to figure out if she was part of the plan or a victim like me. "Your husband tried to poison me," I said. "But I switched cups, and his mother drank the poisoned coffee." Ruth covered her face with her hands. No, he couldn't." "He confessed it, Ruth," I said, stepping toward her. "When his mother started convulsing, he said, 'It had to be you.'" She shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I don't believe it. I can't believe it." "The police will be here soon," I said. "They'll have to check all the cups. If I'm right, they'll find traces of poison in the one Hilda drank from. The poison Prescott put in it, thinking I was drinking it." Ruth looked at me, her eyes full of fear and disbelief. "But why? Why would he do that?" "Money, Ruth," I answered. "It's always about money." Outside, I heard new sirens. The police had arrived. I headed for the door, leaving Ruth standing in the middle of the living room staring at the 3 cups of coffee that had just changed all our lives forever. You're right. This is a serious contradiction to the plan. In the later chapter, Hilda is supposed to wake up in the hospital, not die. I'm fixing the chapter ending to fit the plan and transition smoothly into Chapter 5. The Cloverdale police station wasn't used to serious crime. The officers usually dealt with petty theft, parking violations, and the occasional drunken brawl at Jenkins' bar on weekends. So the appearance of a 78-year-old man with a report of attempted poisoning caused quite a stir. Detective Olivia Abbott, the only detective in the small precinct, led me down the hall to an interview room. She was in her mid-40s with short dark hair and the attentive eyes of someone who had seen enough to not be surprised by anything. "Mr. Halifax, I understand that you've already given your initial statement to Officer Bishop, But I need to hear the whole story again, from the beginning, she said, pointing me to a chair. I sat down, feeling my back ache after 2 hours of sitting on the hard chair in the waiting room. The room was small, with gray walls and a large mirror behind which, I assumed, were the other officers. Sure, I nodded. Where do you want me to start? From the moment Mrs. Weatherby and her son arrived at your house, I told everything from the beginning: the unexpected visit, the tense conversation, Prescott's strange behavior, and his insistence on making coffee. I described how I noticed the unusual odor but omitted the part about changing the cups. Instead, I said that Hilda accidentally picked up the cup meant for me. And you didn't notice anything suspicious about Mr. Weatherby's behavior before his mother passed out? Detective Abbott asked, taking notes. He was nervous, I replied, but I put it down to tension over our recent conflict with Ruth over money. Tell me about that conflict. I sighed, realizing that I would have to tell the whole story. My daughter Ruth and her husband Prescott were constantly asking me for money. Over the years, I had given them over $1 million. A day ago, Ruth came in asking for $375,000, claiming that Prescott needed an experimental treatment for lymphoma. I knew it was a lie, so I turned it down. She left in a rage, threatening that I would never see my grandchildren again. The detective raised an eyebrow. And the next day, her husband comes to you and your mother's house and offers you coffee, which then poisons his own mother. I didn't say he intentionally poisoned his mother, I clarified. I believe the poison was intended for me. Based on his reaction when his mother started convulsing, he said, "It was supposed to be you," and accused me of somehow knowing about his plan. She made a note of it. Mr. Weatherby claims you deliberately poisoned his mother because of a long-standing grudge. I almost laughed. I barely know the woman. I've seen her maybe a dozen times in 20 years. What grudge could I possibly have? He claims you see his family as a threat to your fortune and are trying to eliminate them one by one. Now I actually laughed, though without the mirth. Detective Abbott, I'm 78 years old. I have more money than I can spend in the rest of my life. Why would I risk jail by poisoning an elderly woman? She didn't smile. People kill for far less good reasons, Mr. Halifax, and age is no guarantee of sanity. Fair enough, I agreed. But there's one problem with Prescott's version. He brought the coffee. He insisted he would make it. He indicated which cup was intended for me. If anyone planned the poisoning, it was him. We've seized all 3 cups for analysis, she said. The results should come back within 24 hours. It'll help us figure out what happened. What about Hilda? I asked. Any news on her condition? The detective frowned. She's in critical condition. The doctors say the next 24 hours will be crucial. I felt a prick of conscience. Even though I'd had nothing to do with poisoning Hilda, I'd still switched cups. If I had simply refused the coffee or warned her, maybe she wouldn't be between life and death right now. What was in the coffee? I asked. Preliminary tests indicate the presence of a poisonous substance. I can't tell you the exact name yet, but it's definitely not accidental food poisoning. She closed the notebook. Mr. Halifax, I must warn you that you remain under suspicion. I don't recommend leaving town just yet. I'm not going anywhere, I assured her. I want the truth to come out as much as you do. After the interrogation, I was taken back home. The policeman, a young officer named Brent, seemed awkward and unsure, as if he didn't know how to deal with an older man who could be either a victim or a cold-blooded killer. Your house is still considered a crime scene, sir, he said as we pulled up. The forensics have finished, but some rooms are sealed off. You're allowed in the bedroom, bathroom, and kitchen, but the living room remains sealed until further notice. I nodded, looking at the yellow police tape crossing the living room doorway. The house I'd lived in for almost 40 years suddenly felt foreign and hostile. Thank you, officer, I said, heading for the stairs. I'll be in my room if you need me." In the bedroom, I sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly feeling the weight of the day. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from fatigue and tension. The last time I'd felt like this was after Verna's funeral. The phone rang, making me wince. It was Ruth. "Daddy?" Her voice sounded hoarse, like she'd been crying for a long time. "Are you home?" "Yes, I just got back from the police station," I answered. "So did I. They questioned me for 4 hours." She paused. "They think I might have been an accomplice." "Were you?" I asked bluntly. "No," she exclaimed indignantly. "How can you ask such a thing? I had no idea what Prescott was planning, if he was planning anything at all." "Ruth," I said calmly, as if to a child, "your husband brought poisoned coffee into my house. Hilda's in critical condition right now because she drank it. It wasn't an accident. There's silence on the other end of the line." "I don't know what to think," she said at last. "Prescott says you switched the cups, that you somehow figured out his plan and decided to get revenge by poisoning his mother." I took a deep breath. "And you believe that? That I, your father, a man who never hurt anyone in his life, suddenly decided to become a poisoner?" "I don't know what to believe," her voice broke. "This whole thing is like some kind of nightmare." "How did we get to this point, Dad?" "That's a good question. How did we get to the point where my own daughter could believe that I was capable of murder? Where her husband tried to poison me for money? Where the family became a battlefield?" "I don't know, Ruth," I answered honestly. "But we're here, and we have to deal with reality." "Hilda," she hesitated. "The doctors say she may not survive. Or, if she does survive, she may be left with brain damage. What happens if she dies? Will they charge you with murder? Or your husband?" I pointed out, "depending on what the investigation shows." "Jesus," she whispered. "This can't be true." The next morning, Detective Abbott called me to the hospital. On the way, she reported the results of the coffee analysis. "The cup Mrs. Weatherby drank from had aconitine in it," she said. "It is a poison found in the aconite plant, also known as borer. It's very toxic, even in small doses." "I've never heard of such a plant," I admitted honestly. "Mr. Weatherby has a degree in chemistry, which he earned before he became an insurance appraiser." She paused. "For the past 3 months he had been searching the internet for information on poisons that were difficult to detect at autopsy. Aconitine was one of them." "He was planning it," I said, feeling a chill inside. "I guess so," she nodded. "We also found a small container in his car with powder residue that preliminary tests indicate contains aconitine. His fingerprints are on the container." "So you're going to arrest him?" "We already have," she replied. "This morning. But before we press formal charges, we want to hear what his mother has to say." Hilda Weatherby lay in the intensive care unit, hooked up to multiple monitors and IVs. Her skin had a yellowish tint and her eyes were sunken and reddened. "Mr. Halifax," her voice was barely audible. "Mrs. Weatherby," I nodded. "I'm sorry to hear that." Detective Abbott turned on a small tape recorder. "Mrs. Weatherby, were you aware of your son's plans to poison Mr. Halifax?" Hilda closed her eyes, and for a moment I thought she'd fainted. But then she opened them again, and there was determination in them. "Yes," she breathed out. "I knew." "Were you an accessory?" the detective continued. "No." Hilda shook her head wearily. "I tried to talk him out of it. I went with him, to stop him." "But you didn't warn Mr. Halifax or the police," the detective observed. "He's my son. I thought, I could stop him myself. Stupid." "When did you find out about his plan?" I asked. "2 days ago," she answered. "After Ruth's visit. She came back, upset. Said you refused to give her the money. Prescott was furious. I heard him on the phone. About the poison. Who was he talking to?" the detective asked. "I don't know," Hilda coughed. "I asked him. He said that you were standing between them and millions, that without you, everything would be Ruth's, and therefore to him. And you decided to go with him to stop him? I asked. Yes, her eyes filled with tears. But I couldn't. He insisted on coffee. I thought I could stop you from drinking it. But instead you drank the poisoned coffee yourself, I finished. You switched cups, she smiled weakly. I saw it, when you were standing by the bookcase, but I didn't understand. Why? Detective Abbott turned to me in surprise. You switched cups. Why didn't you say so? I sighed. Because then I'd have to explain why I did it. And that would mean admitting that I suspected Prescott of trying to poison me without any proof. But you did suspect him, the detective argued. Why? Intuition, I guess, I shrugged. He'd never shown any interest in making coffee before, and was overly insistent on telling me which cup was for whom, plus the weird smell. Hilda coughed again, harder this time. The doctor walked over to the bed. She needs to rest, he told the detective. Just another minute, she insisted. Mrs. Weatherby, did Ruth know about her husband's plan? Hilda looked at me, her eyes full of pain. No, she whispered. Ruth didn't know anything. Prescott. He manipulated her for years, used her resentment toward you. But she would never, agree to murder. I was strangely relieved. Despite all our conflicts, Ruth wasn't capable of murder. One last question, said the detective, seeing that the doctor was growing impatient. Mrs. Weatherby, are you prepared to give formal testimony against your son? Hilda closed her eyes. A tear rolled down her cheek. Yes, she answered faintly. He must answer for what he'd done. In the hallway I saw Ruth sitting on a plastic chair, her face swollen with tears. She jumped up when she saw us. How is she? Ruth asked in a shaky voice. She's in stable condition, Detective Abbott replied, but she's conscious and able to testify. Testimony? Ruth looked from the detective to me and back again. About what? That your husband planned to poison your father, Mrs. Weatherby, the detective said, and that you didn't know about the plan. The detective stepped aside to talk to another officer, leaving us alone. I sat down next to Ruth. Why do you still want to help me? She asked. After everything I've done? After I've used you for years for money? Because you're my daughter, Ruth. No matter what. She turned away, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I don't even know who I am without him, she whispered. We've been together 15 years. He's always made the decisions, always told me what to do, how to think, even when it came to you. Detective Abbott returned, her face serious. Mr. Halifax, I have news for you. We searched Mr. Weatherby's office and found something interesting. An insurance policy on your life in the amount of $5 million. I blinked in surprise. I've never taken out a policy like that. No, but your daughter and son-in-law did. She glanced at Ruth, who looked as shocked as I did. The policy was taken out 3 months ago, with Ruth Weatherby as the beneficiary. I didn't know anything about the policy, Ruth whispered. I swear I didn't know anything. The detective looked at her questioningly. Your signature is on the documents, Mrs. Weatherby. I sign a lot of the documents Prescott gives me. Ruth looked defeated. Tax forms, insurance forms. I never read them carefully. I trusted him. At that moment, a nurse ran out of Hilda's room, shouting about the sudden deterioration of the patient's condition. The doctors quickly returned to the room, and through the glass inset, we could see them fussing around Hilda's bed. What's going on? Ruth asked, standing up. She seems to have a complication, replied Detective Abbott. Aconitine is very toxic, especially to the cardiovascular system. We stood in silence watching the medics work. After a few minutes, the doctor came out to us. His face was grim. Mrs. Weatherby's condition is critical, he said. There's arrhythmia and signs of liver failure. We're doing everything we can, but the next few hours will be crucial. Ruth covered her mouth with her hand. Could she Die? The doctor hesitated. In such cases, the prognosis is always grave. But your mother-in-law is a tough woman, and we're using every treatment available. Detective Abbott turned to me. Mr. Halifax, given the new information and Mrs. Weatherby's testimony, we're going to focus our investigation on your son-in-law. However, I will ask you to remain available for additional questions. I nodded. Of course, Detective. I'm not going anywhere. When the detective left, Ruth and I were left standing outside Hilda's room, watching the doctors fight for her life. Suddenly, Ruth turned to me. Did Prescott really want to kill you? Her voice trembled. For money? It seems so, I answered quietly. The insurance policy, the poison research, the training. It wasn't an impulsive decision. And I didn't notice anything, she shook her head. All these years, I thought I knew him. But I didn't know him at all. At that moment, the monitor in Hilda's room began to emit an alarm. The doctor quickly checked the vitals and made some adjustments to the IV. After a minute, the beeping stopped and the doctor came out to see us. We have stabilized her condition, but it remains critical, he reported. The next 24 hours will tell if she can recover from the crisis. Can I stay with her? Ruth asked. The doctor nodded. Just one visitor, and not for long. Talk to her. Even when unconscious, patients often hear their loved ones. Ruth looked at me as if asking permission. Go, I said. I'll be back tomorrow morning. She nodded and went into the room, closing the door carefully behind her. I walked out of the hospital into the evening rain. Cloverdale looked quiet and peaceful, as if nothing had happened, as if there wasn't a woman lying in one of its hospital rooms poisoned by her own son, and the son wasn't sitting in a police station cell accused of attempted murder. How did we get to this point? From a family that once gathered around the Christmas table to people willing to kill each other for money? I didn't know the answer. All I knew was that if Hilda survived, her testimony could send Prescott to prison for years. And that meant my daughter and grandchildren would be left alone, possibly destitute. And as angry as I was at Ruth for her years of manipulation and greed, I couldn't let her and the children suffer. That wouldn't be the person I'd been raised to be. The phone in my pocket vibrated. It was a message from Detective Abbott. Prescott Weatherby confesses to attempted poisoning, claims to have acted alone. Full charge will be filed tomorrow morning. I sighed and lifted the collar of my coat, shielding myself from the rain. Tomorrow would be a new day, and maybe Hilda would have a chance to recover. And for Ruth and me, a chance for a new beginning, with no shadow of Prescott between us. It's been a week since that aconitine coffee changed everything. I sat at the window in the hospital room, watching the rain dripping down the glass, blurring the outline of Cloverdale. Hilda Weatherby lay on the bed, her condition finally stabilized after several critical days. The doctors called her recovery a medical miracle. At her age and with the dose of poison she'd received, the chances were minimal. She opened her eyes as I turned to her. Her gaze was clearer than it had been in days, as if the fog that had enveloped her mind had finally cleared. Leighton, her voice was still weak, but there was strength in it. You're here. Of course. I pulled the chair closer to the bed. How are you feeling? Like a person who looked beyond the edge and came back, she smiled weakly. I don't recommend the experience. I nodded, not knowing what to say. What do they say to a man who almost died because of a poison meant for you? There's something I need to tell you, she said suddenly, trying to pull herself up on the pillows. I helped her, supporting her by the shoulders. Something I hadn't told the police. About Ruth. I tensed. In her last statement, Hilda had claimed that Ruth didn't know about her husband's plans. Which was what? Hilda took a deep breath as if gathering her strength. I lied, Leighton. Ruth knew. She always knew. I felt something cold clench in my chest. Are you sure? Yes. She closed her eyes for a moment. I heard them talking. 3 days before the incident. They were at my house, thinking I'd gone to bed. They were discussing how to get rid of you. I gripped the armrests of my chair, feeling my hands start to tremble. "Tell me everything, Hilda, please." She opened her eyes with the determination of a man who no longer wanted to bear the burden of secrets. "It started when you refused the money." Ruth was furious. She had come to Prescott with an idea, not the other way around. She said, "We'll never get what we deserve as long as he's alive." At first, I thought those were just words spoken in anger. But then Prescott started researching poisons. I found his notes, computer searches. "And you didn't go to the police?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "He's my son." Her eyes filled with tears. "My only child. I thought I could talk him out of it, keep him from this madness. But you couldn't." It wasn't a question. It was a statement. "No," she shook her head. "They were determined. Ruth said that without you, they'd have everything, the house, the investments, the insurance. They were already planning how they would spend the money." I closed my eyes, trying to make sense of what I'd heard. All this time I'd thought Ruth was just greedy and spoiled, but not capable of murder. I was wrong. "Why did you decide to tell the truth now?" I asked. "Because I was dying, Leighton." She looked me straight in the eye. "I was lying here, thinking that every breath might be my last, and I realized I couldn't walk away with those lies. I'd been protecting them all my life. Prescott, from the consequences of his actions. Ruth, because she was my son's wife. But there's a line you can't cross. They crossed it." "Will you tell that to the police?" "I already did." She nodded at the nightstand where a small tape recorder lay. "Detective Abbott was here this morning. I gave a full sworn statement. They're arresting Ruth today." I felt a strange numbness. Not pain, not anger, just emptiness. Like a part of me had died in that hospital room. "Do you realize what this means for your grandchildren?" I asked. "They could be without both parents." "I've thought about that," her voice trembled. "But what's best for them? To live with parents who planned murder for money, or to learn the truth, however bitter it may be?" I didn't have an answer. There was no right answer to that question. "They're good kids," Hilda continued. "Deserve better than what Ruth and Prescott gave them. Maybe you could help them." "Me?" I was surprised at the suggestion. "You're their grandfather," she smiled weakly. "The only normal adult in their lives, as it turned out." I wondered. Hazel was 12, Thatcher was 10. Kids I'd only seen on holidays, kids I barely spoke to. Children whose names Ruth and Prescott had probably picked out of a fashion magazine without thinking about the meaning. Could I be their rock when their world was falling apart? "I'll try," I finally said, "but I'm not sure they'll accept me." "Give them time." Hilda reached out and touched mine. Her fingers were as cold and dry as autumn leaves. "They're smart kids. They'll realize who really cares about them." We sat in silence, listening to the sound of the rain and the measured beeping of the monitors. Finally, I asked the question that had been plaguing me ever since I saw the panic in Prescott's eyes when his mother began convulsing. "Why did you come with me that day, Hilda, if you knew what they were planning?" She was silent for a long time, looking out the window at the gray sky. "I thought I could stop him at the last moment," she finally answered. "Distract you, spill coffee, something. But when we arrived, when I saw you, so alone in that big house, I thought, why? Why do they hate this man so much? Is it the money? Because he refused to indulge their greed?" She shook her head. "I raised a monster, Leighton. It's my fault. I always gave Prescott everything he wanted, never said no, never taught him to appreciate what he had instead of craving more." "We both made the same mistakes," I remarked. "It was the same with Ruth." "Perhaps," she sighed. "But now they must answer for their actions, as adults." At that moment the door of the room opened and Detective Abbott came in. Her face was serious, but there was something like sympathy in her eyes. "Mr. Halifax," she nodded at me. "Mrs. Weatherby, I think you'll both be interested to know that we've just arrested Ruth Weatherby. She is at the police station awaiting arraignment on charges of conspiracy to murder. I closed my eyes. It's one thing to know that your daughter was planning your death. It's quite another to hear that she's been arrested for it. How is she? I asked. Broken, the detective answered honestly. She confessed everything as soon as we showed her the tapes of her conversations with her husband, which he had secretly recorded. Prescott was recording their conversations? Hilda wondered. Yes, the detective nodded. It seems that he planned to use these recordings as an insurance policy in case something went wrong, to put the blame on Ruth, if need be. My son, Hilda shook her head, unable to finish her sentence. What will happen to the children? I asked, thinking of Hazel and Thatcher, who were probably scared and confused now. They've been temporarily placed in the care of social services, the detective replied. Ruth asked me to contact you. She wants you to take custody of them. I was surprised. After everything that had happened, Ruth still trusted me with her children? I need to think about it, I said. It's a big responsibility. Of course, the detective nodded. But the children need someone now, someone to be there for them until this is all over. When the detective left, I was left sitting next to Hilda, trying to make sense of everything that had happened this week. My daughter and her husband had planned to kill me for money. Now they were both in custody and their children were left alone. And for some reason, everyone was looking at me, expecting me to make things right. Will you take them? Hilda asked quietly. The children? I sighed. I don't know if I can. I'm 78. I have arthritis and high blood pressure. I'm not sure I can handle 2 teenagers. You can handle it, she smiled weakly. You're stronger than you think, and wiser. Are you? I asked. What will you do when you get out of here? Her face became serious. I'm cutting all ties with Prescott. He's no longer my son. What he did, what he planned to do, I can't forgive it. I understood her. Some lines, once crossed, cannot be retraced. But I would like to stay in my grandchildren's lives, she added, if you'll let me. Of course, I nodded. They will need all the support they can get. The next day I met with Alvin Hammond, my attorney, to discuss the changes to the will. In light of recent events, the old document in which most of my estate went to Ruth needed a major revision. So, Alvin adjusted his glasses, looking across the table at me. What changes do you want to make? I want to disinherit Ruth, I said bluntly. Completely. Not a dime to her or Prescott. Alvin nodded without showing surprise. He knew what had happened. The whole of Cloverdale was buzzing with the story. And the children? He asked. Your grandchildren? I want to set up a trust fund for them, I answered. But with conditions. The money will be available only for education, medical needs, and basic maintenance. They will be able to receive the principal amount only when they reach the age of 25, and only if they get a higher education. Reasonable, Alvin made notes. Who will manage the trust? You, if you agree, I looked at him. I trust you. He nodded, accepting the responsibility. And the rest? I pulled a list from my pocket. Here are the names of my distant relatives, cousins, nephews, children of my cousins, people I lost touch with years ago. You want to leave the money to them? Alvin looked surprised. Not all of them at once, I shook my head. I want you to find them. Find out how they live, what they do. And the ones who really need and deserve help, I want to support. Not just to give money, but to help with specific needs, to pay for their children's education, to help with their mortgages, to finance their medical treatment. Alvin smiled. It's a big job, Leighton, but a noble one. I have time, I shrugged. And frankly, I need something to take my mind off of, all of this. After my meeting with Alvin, I went to Ruth and Prescott's house to pack for the children. The house was empty and strangely quiet. On the kitchen table were open bills and notices from the bank, a reminder of the financial problems that had driven Ruth and Prescott to their terrible plan. I went upstairs to the children's rooms. Hazel's room was typical for a 12-year-old girl. Posters of music bands, books on shelves, scattered clothes. Thatcher's room was filled with model airplanes and science books. I never knew my grandson was interested in aviation. As I gathered their belongings, I reflected on how little I knew my grandchildren, what interest I had in their lives, their hobbies, their dreams. Almost none. I was too busy with my resentment toward Ruth, too consumed with my own pain after Verna's death. Maybe now I had a chance to fix that. 3 days later, I brought Hazel and Thatcher to my house. They were quiet, depressed, still in shock from their parents' arrest and the sudden move. I showed them their rooms, the former guest bedrooms I'd hastily remodeled for them, buying new beds and desks. "These are temporary," I explained. "You can decorate the rooms however you want." They nodded without saying a word. Hazel held onto her brother's hand as if she was afraid that if she let go, she'd lose him too. "Listen." I knelt down, despite the pain in my joints, to be level with them. "I know this is all terribly difficult for you, and I know we hardly know each other. But I promise I will do everything I can to make sure you have a good time here. We'll get through this together, okay?" Thatcher was the first to break the silence. "Did Mom and Dad really want to kill you?" His voice was quiet but firm. I sighed. The kids deserved the truth, but how could I explain to them what I didn't understand? "They made a very bad choice," I finally said. "They got confused and decided that money was more important than family. It was wrong, and now they will have to answer for their actions." "Will they come back?" Hazel asked, her eyes full of tears. "Not soon," I was honest. "But you can visit them if you want to, and I'll be with you as long as you need me." This was not the life I had planned for my 78 years. It wasn't how I envisioned my relationship with my grandchildren. But sometimes life gives us the most unexpected twists and turns. Over the next few weeks, my children and I learned to live together. It wasn't easy. They were depressed, angry, confused. I was old, stubborn, and unaccustomed to the children's constant presence in the house. But gradually, we found common ground. I learned that Thatcher dreams of becoming a pilot and arranged to meet with an old friend of mine, a former military pilot. Hazel turned out to be a talented artist, and I enrolled her in drawing lessons at the local cultural center. When Hilda was released from the hospital, she became a frequent visitor to our home. Her recovery was slow, but she grew stronger every day. The children were happy to see her. She was a link to their old life, to a time when things were simpler and clearer. One evening, when the children were asleep, Hilda and I sat on the veranda watching the stars. "Did you ever think we'd end up here?" she asked, wrapped in a blanket. "After everything that's happened?" "Never," I shook my head. "But life is full of surprises, isn't it?" "Sometimes terrible ones," she sighed. "I visited Prescott in prison yesterday, for the last time." I looked at her but didn't ask for details. It was her choice, her goodbye to a son who'd crossed a line from which he couldn't be forgiven. "I told him I wouldn't come again," she continued, "that I couldn't be the mother of a man who would kill for money." "How did he react?" "Blamed it all on Ruth. Said she manipulated him." Hilda grinned bitterly. "Always looking for someone to blame. Always." We were silent, each of us thinking about our child, about the decisions that had brought us all to this moment. "I talked to Ruth last week," I said finally. She admitted her guilt. Said she didn't expect forgiveness, but she wanted the children to know that she loved them no matter what. "Do you believe her?" Hilda asked. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "But the children need to know that their mother loves them, even if she's made a terrible mistake." Hilda nodded, understanding. "You're a good man, Leighton. Despite everything they tried to do to you, you still care about them. The children. It's not their fault," I said. "They shouldn't have to pay for the sins of their parents." That night, lying in bed, I thought about the strange turn my life had taken. At 78, I was suddenly the guardian of 2 teenagers. I had reconnected with distant relatives I had almost forgotten existed. Even started a new friendship with a woman who should have hated me for indirectly causing her son's arrest. Life is indeed full of surprises. In the morning, I woke up to the sound of laughter. Looking out the window, I saw Thatcher flying a kite in the garden. Hazel was sitting on the grass, drawing in her sketchbook. They looked normal, like normal kids enjoying a sunny day. I went downstairs and walked out to them. Thatcher saw me and waved. "Grandpa, look how high he's flying." Grandfather. He'd never called me that before, always Grandpa or just Leighton like his parents taught him. "Impressive," I smiled as I looked at the red kite dancing in the air. "Where did you learn to fly it like that?" "Dad showed me," he answered without bitterness, just stating the fact. "A long time ago." I nodded, thinking that not everything about Prescott was bad. He was a terrible husband, a disgusting son-in-law, and, as it turned out, a potential murderer. But maybe in some moments he was a good father. "Would you like a taste of that?" Thatcher handed me a spool of fishing line. "Sure." I took the spool, feeling the kite pull it upward. "Though I haven't flown a kite since your mom was little." "Have you?" Hazel looked up from her drawing. "Did Mom like to fly kites?" "She loved it," I smiled, remembering. "She had a purple kite shaped like a butterfly. She could run with it for hours in the field behind our old house." The kids listened with interest, hungry for any information about what their parents were like before everything went wrong. So I told them. About little Ruth, who loved strawberry ice cream and was afraid of spiders. About how I taught her to ride her bike and how she fell and shattered her knee but didn't cry, just gritted her teeth and asked me to continue the lesson. Maybe through these stories they can keep some good things about their parents. Maybe someday they can realize that people are more complicated than their worst behaviors. In the meantime, we had this moment, a sunny morning, a kite in the sky, and a new beginning for all of us. That evening, after the kids went to bed, I sat in my office and pulled out an old photo album. Leafing through the pages, I looked at pictures of our family: Verna, Ruth, me. We looked happy, normal. How had we gotten from those smiling faces to attempted murder? Perhaps there was no answer. Perhaps sometimes greed and resentment just poison people's hearts, turning them into strangers. I closed the album and walked to the window. The stars shone brightly over Cloverdale. Somewhere out there, in a jail cell, sat my daughter, contemplating the cost of her actions. I couldn't forgive her. Not now, maybe never. But I could try to be a better grandfather to her children than I had been a father to her. It wasn't the ending I expected from my story, but at least it was an ending in which I was still alive, in which the truth, however bitter, finally came out, in which, perhaps, there was room for new beginnings. And sometimes that's all we can hope for.